It's often been said in WWE that the only thing more important than the wrestling is the reason for the wrestling. A good storyline turns wrestlers into superstars and keeps fans watching. A bad storyline does the exact opposite. Take, for example, number 10, Booker T, Edge, and a shampoo commercial. In February 2002, Booker T was auditioning for a Japanese shampoo commercial. However, Edge managed to snake it right under Booker's nose, and that's it. Literally, that's the reason they were fighting. What made this storyline even weirder is that Booker T was the bad guy while Edge was the good guy. Booker called the fans stupid and blamed them for why he lost the shampoo commercial. This was enough for Edge and Booker T to have a match at WrestleMania 18, and this sign from a fan says it all. In terms of pointless storylines, this is the gold standard. Could WWE really not think of a better reason for these two legends to have a match? In 1990, Edge, at the age of 16, was in the crowd at the Skydome watching WrestleMania 6. How much better of a storyline would this have been if it were about Edge returning to the Skydome for WrestleMania 18 as a WWE superstar? That's so much more emotional and meaningful than fighting over a fictional shampoo commercial. Now, to be fair, the original idea was to do a hair versus hair match, hence the shampoo commercial. However, WWE wanted Booker T to lose, but Booker didn't want to go bald, and that was that. I'd list this storyline at number 10 because, while it was pointless, it didn't hurt either wrestler's career, and it didn't really hurt the show. This next storyline, though, was just downright disgusting, and that's number 9, Mae Young's hand. Mark Henry's sexual chocolate character was made purely for outrageous moments. A lot of it was shocking for the sake of being shocking, and the Mae Young hand storyline is the perfect example. In late 1999, Mark Henry was already established as a sex addict, so it wasn't surprising to see him in bed. What was surprising was who he was in bed with. Good God. The two kept bonking until Mae Young made a shocking announcement.
I'm pregnant! What?
Yes, 77-year-old Mae Young was pregnant with Mark Henry's child. Again, this storyline was just meant to shock and disgust people, and somehow WWE managed to make it even weirder. Soon after the pregnancy announcement, Mark Henry was having a match against Kurt Angle. Mae Young ran in, but was then attacked by Angle. This not only led to the baby being born premature, but it wasn't your typical child either. Yes, Mae Young and Mark Henry's baby was a hand. Why was it a hand? Because it's a hand. This whole storyline was simply WWE asking itself, what's the most outrageous thing we can do? It wasn't entertaining, and it didn't help anyone's career. The only thing that was somewhat good about it was that it created this moment 12 years later.
Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Mae Young's son.
Now, at least WWE had a plan with the Mae Young storyline. This next one was ruined before it had a chance. I'm of course referring to number 8, Eric Rowan's cage. You want to know how to kill a wrestling storyline before it even starts? Not knowing how it's going to end. And Eric Rowan and his cage fell victim to this. In November 2019, Eric Rowan started carrying a cage with him to the ring. What was inside? How did Rowan get a hold of it? Why was he bringing it to the ring? We didn't know, but whatever it was, Rowan was very careful with it. Over the next couple of months, we would see the thing inside attack Eric Rowan's opponents and even him at one point. Some people don't like these types of storylines in wrestling, and I understand why. They can be a bit silly and unrealistic. To me, I don't mind them as long as they have a good payoff. So, what was inside that cage? A mechanical spider. Where did the spider come from? Why did Rowan have it? All questions that WWE never answered. 1 week after the spider's reveal, Drew McIntyre destroyed it, and Eric Rowan was fired about a month later. Was this going to be an all-time great storyline? No, but it could have been alright. The problem was, WWE created it without having any idea of where it was going to end, and it clearly shows. Eric Rowan shared what he would have wanted to have inside the cage, and it's way better than what WWE actually went with.
I wanted the actress that was in American Horror Story, La Petite. I wanted her to be in the cage. I wanted her to be my friend that I was protecting from the outside world, and she knew that she would lock herself into the cage to protect herself from the looks and the jeers, just like I would get looks and jeers.
Number 7, Michelle McCool gets abused. I don't hear this storyline talked about much at all, which is probably for the best. In 2007, Michelle McCool was paired with Chuck Palumbo as his girlfriend. During this relationship, Palumbo would begin to lose match after match. It was implied that Chuck took his frustrations out of McCool as she was seen backstage with a black eye. WWE didn't actually say it was Chuck Palumbo who hit Michelle at first. But as the storyline progressed, Palumbo grew increasingly enraged with Michelle McCool, partially due to Jamie Noble also showing interest in the future Mrs. Undertaker. Anyways, this led to Chuck Palumbo threatening Michelle and then actually hurting her. Domestic abuse storylines rarely, if ever, work in wrestling. Why? Well, a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest is the setting. Wrestling is filmed in an arena in front of a live audience, and that's not the environment that really works well with a serious topic like domestic violence. The Chuck Palumbo and Michelle McCool storyline was another attempt to make it work, but why does it make the list? Well, for one, it was basically the same thing week after week, and it never developed beyond Palumbo abusing McCool, with Jamie Noble being the nice, but smaller guy. Plus, there wasn't a satisfying ending. Michelle McCool just broke up with Palumbo. To make it even worse, Chuck Palumbo beat Jamie Noble not once, but 3 times to end the story. Yeah, let's have the domestic abuser be the winner in the end. It was a bad storyline, but at least it wasn't painful to watch. This next storyline was. Number 6, the Viking Raiders vs. the Street Profits. In April 2020, the Viking Raiders confronted the Raw Tag Team Champions, the Street Profits. The Raiders claimed the Profits were second best. Rather than, have a wrestling match to prove that, the two teams competed in a variety of competitions, like basketball, axe throwing, golf, and more. This was similar to Matt Hardy and MVP's feud in 2007, but while that storyline was fun, this one was not. The skits all felt cheap and were just not enjoyable to watch. Making it even worse is how the storyline ended. After several weeks of these competitions, the Viking Raiders and the Street Profits finally faced off at the Backlash pay-per-view, but it wasn't a traditional tag team match. Instead, the teams fought outside in the parking lot. It was essentially like a short film. A bad one. The two sides later had to team up to fight off a group of ninjas, but they later had to retreat once a giant ninja came in. The quote-unquote match ended when both teams landed in a dumpster and were attacked by a tentacle monster. It was just as insane as it sounded, but it wasn't a fun kind of insane, just a random and directionless one. This was during the pandemic era, so I'm not as critical because of that, and I also give WWE props for trying something different. But this wasn't it. Number 5, Daniel Bryan and the Bellas love quadrilateral. You know the phrase, right place, right time? Well, that applies to wrestling storylines too. The rivalries and feuds that we see in WWE right now wouldn't have worked 40 years ago, and vice versa. It's not that these storylines were bad, but they worked because they were right for that era. So, what happens when you have a storyline in the Raw era? Well, you get the Daniel Bryan and Bella twins love quadrilateral. In late 2010, an idea was pitched where Nikki and Brie Bella would battle to be the first woman that Daniel Bryan lost his virginity to. The payoff would be that the twins eventually found out that Bryan was a vegan, not a virgin. In the Attitude Era, this still would have been sophomoric, but it would have at least fit for that time period. However, this was pitched in 2010, the peak of the PG era, so obviously they couldn't do it. For some reason though, WWE felt the world needed a Bella Twins Daniel Bryan love storyline, so they still did it, but just had the Bellas fighting over Bryan's affection. But wait, how did they end the storyline? Well, the Bellas discovered that Bryan had been in a relationship with Gail Kim all along. Oh gosh, where do I begin? Outside of timing, the biggest problem with the storyline was how awkward it was. None of it felt natural.
Oh, Daniel! Oh, gosh.
Oh my gosh, when you do submissions, gosh, that's so hot.
Yeah, baby.
On top of that, this sort of turned Daniel Bryan heel, I think? WWE didn't really commit to it, which was for the best because Bryan as a heel wasn't gonna work. Sure, when he became the Planet's champion in 2018, that was good. But if you're gonna make Daniel Bryan a villain, having him cheat on the Bellas wasn't the way to do it. Like I said, had this been the Attitude Era, it wouldn't have been a great storyline, but it would have fit for that time, and WWE would have been able to tell the story exactly how they wanted. Because this was the PG era, they had to work around that, which left us with a terrible storyline. But you know what's worse than a terrible storyline? A terrible storyline that also creates one of the worst matches in WWE history. I'm talking about number 4, the Mystery Woman. So, in mid-2004, Victoria was feuding with the women's champion, Trish Stratus. Stratus had Tyson Tomko as her bodyguard. This helped Trish one-up Victoria almost every time they wrestled. However, a woman covered from head to toe would eventually run in and help even the playing field. Finally, at the 2004 Unforgiven pay-per-view, Tyson Tomko called out the Mystery Woman and the two had a match. Tomko ripped the woman's clothes off, revealing it wasn't a woman at all, but in fact, a man, Stevie Richards. This came as a shock to no one, as it was obvious from the beginning that it was Stevie.
Look at the king of some mystery woman. Mystery woman.
As for the match, it went on way too long. The crowd was not into it, and the commentators had no idea what to say. Even the reveal that it was Stevie was underwhelming.
It's Stevie Richards.
Now, one thing I do give the storyline credit for is that Stevie Richards and Victoria had history together. Around late 2002, the two formed an alliance, but they split up after Victoria stopped being a heel, a bad guy, and became a babyface, a good guy. So, Stevie Richards being the mystery woman wasn't random. However, why did Stevie start wearing drag? Why was he hiding his identity? The storyline never explained. The whole thing was just a waste of time, and it left an awful taste in everyone's mouth. So far, a lot of these storylines have involved mid-card wrestlers, not the big stars that WWE was really trying to sell to fans. That changes with number 3, the anonymous Raw General Manager. If you watched WWE like I did during this time, that sound is burned into your memory forever. In 2010, Bret Hart made his long-awaited return to WWE and was later made the general manager of Monday Night Raw. However, after being attacked by the Nexus, Hart had to be relieved of his duties. Vince McMahon then announced there would be a new Raw general manager, a laptop. Don't worry, it wasn't ChatGPT. McMahon explained that the new GM preferred to remain anonymous and would make all their decisions via emails sent to the laptop, which McCool would then read off. This story lasted for about a year, with hints dropped along the way about who the anonymous Raw general manager might be.
Your actions will be met with appropriate consequences, and that's the bottom line because the GM said so.
The anonymous Raw GM was a main fixture in WWE for almost a year. It would make announcements, usually multiple times during the show. The anonymous GM wasn't just involved in small storylines either. Oh no, it got its hands involved in the major rivalries and feuds. Whoever the anonymous Raw general manager was, his or her identity was gonna be a big reveal. However, in July 2011, the anonymous Raw general manager just disappeared, with no resolution or payoff. Like I said with Eric Rowan and his spider, when WWE starts a storyline without knowing how it's going to end, it's a recipe for disaster. However, at least with Rowan's storyline, there was an ending. A bad one, but still an ending. The anonymous Raw general manager had no satisfying conclusion. I know technically WWE revealed in 2012 that it was Hornswoggle, but that was meant as a joke. Although, Hornswoggle was Vince McMahon's illegitimate son, that would explain why Swoggle would be made general manager. Plus, Hornswoggle could speak, so having him communicate via email would have made sense. No, this storyline was dumb. The main reason though I'm making a big deal out of this one is because WWE did. The anonymous Raw GM was a major storyline, and it was set up to create a big reveal. The fact that WWE dropped it without any resolution is one of the main frustrations fans had with WWE during this era. At the very least, this storyline didn't kill anyone's career. This next one was so awful that it destroyed a wrestler's WWE career before it even had a chance to get started. That's right, it's number 2, DDP stalking The Undertaker's wife. WWE is such a bizarre company because sometimes storylines are created just to embarrass or punish someone. Unfortunately, we the fans have to suffer through it. Case in point, the DDP stalking storyline. In the spring of 2001, videos began playing on Raw showing someone stalking The Undertaker's wife, Sarah. This went on for several weeks until the stalker finally revealed himself. A man wearing a black mask drove Undertaker's bike down to the ring on Raw. Who was it? It was Diamond Dallas Page. I actually discussed this in my top 10 worst debuts video, and not only was it a bad first appearance for Diamond Dallas Page, but it only got worse from here. First off, why was DDP stalking Undertaker's wife? It had been well established that Page had an incredibly attractive wife, Kimberly Page. It just didn't make sense. Anyways, after DDP's debut, this storyline went on for about 2 months. During that entire time, DDP never got a single win over The Undertaker, not even in a tag team match or anything. The Undertaker was well established at this time, but DDP wasn't. At least not in WWE. Page didn't necessarily need to pin Undertaker, but he needed something to give him credibility, but WWE wouldn't give it. Part of that might be because Page was coming from WCW, the company that tried to put WWE out of business. Apparently, there's also a backstage story of DDP hugging Vince McMahon instead of shaking his hand, which didn't sit right with Vince. Not sure if it's true or not, but either way, this storyline was more than likely a way to humble Diamond Dallas Page. especially when you see how the storyline ended. After being defeated at SummerSlam, DDP fought Undertaker's wife Sarah on Raw. To put an end to the feud, Sarah pinned DDP, and that was that. Wow, if Sarah had been a wrestler, that would have been one thing, but she wasn't. I get that Undertaker did all the work, but this is still a bad way to end the storyline. It didn't benefit The Undertaker, Sarah didn't make any more appearances in WWE after this, and it killed DDP's WWE career. How bad can these storylines get? Well, there's one more that's even worse. Before I share that, here are a few dishonorable mentions. Chris Jericho spills coffee on Kane. In the fall of 2000, Chris Jericho accidentally spilled coffee on Kane backstage. That's what kickstarted this entire rivalry. Now, the actual feud was about how Kane saw Jericho as a symbol of the beautiful people. So, the bigger machine wanted Y2J to feel what he felt, which meant destroying Jericho's face, just like what had happened to Kane. It's not a bad premise, but the fact that it started over a spilled coffee and was repeatedly brought up ruined any chance of the story being taken seriously. John Cena gets stabbed. In late 2004, John Cena was riding high as the United States Champion on SmackDown. That was until a man from the Caribbean named Carlito debuted and beat Cena for the title. To make matters worse, shortly after the defeat, John Cena was stabbed while out at a nightclub. It wasn't Carlito who did the attack, but rather a bodyguard/hitman he had hired named Jesus. Cena was gone for about a month and returned without a scratch on him. Now, the real reason behind this was that John Cena needed some time off to go film a movie. I honestly don't know why WWE thought a stabbing was the way to go. There were no visuals or anything either. It was just an announcement Teddy Long gave to the SmackDown roster. These types of storylines just don't work in wrestling, and that's why this one is so infamous. Lana cheats on Rusev. This is another storyline that was done just to shock people. In September 2019, Bobby Lashley returned to WWE, and by his side was Rusev's wife, Lana. The two tormented Rusev for weeks and had a number of spicy moments. Like Daniel Bryan and the Bellas, this one felt really out of place. Oh, and don't forget how WWE had Liv Morgan come out and confess her love to Lana just to get a reaction. As if the storyline couldn't get any worse, Rusev lost basically all of his matches against Bobby Lashley and was then fired. Yeah, a real feel-good storyline. On top of that, Bobby Lashley would just dump Lana a few months after the story wrapped up, making the whole thing a waste of time. The invasion. It's been talked to death, so I'm not going to go too long. But after WWE bought WCW and ECW in 2001, it felt like the possibilities were endless. Now, all those dream matches fans had wanted for years could finally happen. Well, not really. Almost all the big WCW stars wouldn't appear in WWE until at least a year later due to the contracts they had in WCW. There were still WCW wrestlers who immediately came to WWE, but it was mainly lesser known names. Because of this, Team WCW and ECW, or the Alliance as they were called, had to have WWE wrestlers defect to their side in order to give them a boost. In fact, the big final match between WWE and the Alliance at Survivor Series featured 3 WWE wrestlers on the Alliance's side, which should have been one of the greatest storylines in wrestling history, wound up being one of the most infamous. But what could be worse than this? Well, it's time for number 1. The worst WWE storyline of all time is Katie Vick. If you know, you know. And if you don't, allow me to explain. In 2002, Triple H had just become the World Heavyweight Champion. Kane became one of the game's first challengers after he defeated Chris Jericho to become the #1 contender. A few weeks later, however, Triple H hit Kane and the fans with this.
Let me ask you a question, Kane. How happy is Katie Vick?
Fans were left wondering who Katie Vick was and how she was connected to Kane. After avoiding the question, Kane finally came clean. He explained that when he was a teenager, he had a friend named Katie Vick. They went to a party where Katie got drunk, so the bigger machine drove her home. On the ride home, an animal jumped out in front of their vehicle, causing them to crash. Kane survived, but Katie died instantly. First off, this totally retconned Kane's origin story. It was established that Kane was the Undertaker's half-brother and that he had been burned alive in a house fire. That's why he was covered up and wore a mask. Undertaker thought Kane was dead, but the Katie Vick storyline made it clear that Kane was fine this whole time. This also really killed the aura of Kane's character, but it got worse. Triple H said that Kane also had been drinking, and he was to blame for Katie Vick's death. On top of that, Triple H asked if Kane slept with Katie Vick alive or dead. Now, if the storyline would have ended here, it would have been bad. But what happened next is why it's number 1. A week after the Katie Vick revelation, Triple H shared a tape he had filmed. It showed the game wearing a Kane mask at a funeral home. A mannequin that represented Katie Vick was inside a casket, and the game then did some NSFW things to it. Yeah, necrophilia. It doesn't get worse than that. Now, who is the worst world champion in WWE history? Well, to find out, watch the video on screen.